They say the help is invisible, and for 3 years, I lived that truth every single day in the Morrison mansion. I was Sophia, quiet, dependable, the woman who kept their perfect world spinning while they barely acknowledged my existence. But what Daniel Morrison and his elite circle didn't know was that this, just a nanny, had been building something extraordinary in the shadows. The night he humiliated me in front of his friends would be the last time anyone would ever look down on me again. If you're ready to hear how I turned my biggest humiliation into my greatest triumph, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. The Morrison mansion stood like a monument to wealth on Beacon Hill, its pristine white columns gleaming under the morning sun, as I pulled my beat-up Honda into the staff parking area behind the kitchen. 3 years, 2 months, and 15 days. That's exactly how long I'd been calling this place my workplace, my home, and sometimes my prison. As I walked through the service entrance, little Emma's laughter echoed from the breakfast room, followed immediately by 6-year-old Connor's protests about his scrambled eggs being too eggy. These children had become my world, and in many ways, I'd become theirs. Their mother, Patricia, was always jet-setting to charity galas in Paris or art auctions in Milan, while their father, Daniel Morrison, CEO of Morrison Holdings, treated parenting like a board meeting he'd rather delegate. "Sophia," Emma's voice rang out as I entered the kitchen. She launched herself into my arms with the kind of enthusiasm that made every challenging moment worth it. "Daddy said we're having a big party tonight with lots of important people." Daniel Morrison looked up from his Wall Street Journal, his steel-gray eyes barely registering my presence. At 42, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. Tall, sharp-featured, with the confidence that only comes from generational wealth. "The children will need to be in bed by 7, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have investors coming tonight, and I can't have them running around disturbing important conversations." "Of course, Mr. Morrison," I replied, settling Emma back down and smoothing Connor's unruly hair. "Will Mrs. Morrison be joining us for dinner tonight?" he snorted, a sound that somehow managed to convey both amusement and disdain. "Patricia is in the Hamptons with the Vanderbilts, something about a silent auction for underprivileged artists." He said it with the same tone one might use to describe a particularly boring documentary. What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while I'd been watching their children, cleaning their messes, and organizing their lives, I'd also been watching them, learning from them, understanding how their world worked, what made them tick, and most importantly, what they valued above all else: respect, status, and the appearance of success. For the past 18 months, I'd been pouring every spare moment and every saved dollar into something that started as a desperate dream and had slowly become my secret reality. Late at night, after tucking Connor and Emma into their designer beds, I'd been building an empire from my small attic room. Premium childcare wasn't just babysitting. It was about creating environments where children of high-achieving parents could thrive while their parents focused on their careers. It was about understanding that wealthy families didn't just want someone to watch their kids. They wanted someone who could seamlessly integrate into their lifestyle while providing educational, emotional, and social development that matched their expectations. The idea had crystallized during one of Patricia's many extended absences. I'd been managing not just the children's daily routines, but coordinating with their tutors, organizing playdates with other elite families, and essentially running a household that most people would need a team of 5 to handle. That's when I realized I wasn't just good at this. I was exceptional. And more importantly, there were hundreds of families just like the Morrisons who needed exactly what I could provide. But dreams don't pay bills, and starting a business requires capital I didn't have. That's where fate stepped in, wearing designer clothes and carrying a Hermes bag. It was 6 months ago when everything changed. I'd taken Emma and Connor to their weekly piano lesson at the conservatory downtown, when I noticed a woman sitting alone in the waiting area, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She was elegant in that effortless way that money can't buy. Natural beauty, enhanced by the kind of subtle styling that costs more than most people's monthly salary. Emma, being the empathetic soul she was, had walked right up to the woman and offered her a tissue from her little purse. "My nanny always says crying helps wash the sadness away," she'd said with the wisdom only a 5-year-old can possess. The woman looked up, and I immediately recognized her. Miranda Chen, the Oscar-nominated actress who'd been all over the tabloids for her messy divorce from tech mogul James Richardson. But in that moment, she wasn't a celebrity. She was just a mother struggling with the impossible balance of career and family. "I'm sorry," I'd said, approaching carefully. "Emma has a gift for making people feel better. Are you all right?" What followed was a conversation that lasted well beyond the children's piano lesson. Miranda was facing a custody battle that threatened to derail her career just as she'd landed the role of a lifetime. She needed someone who could provide premium care for her 8-year-old son while she was filming, someone who understood the unique pressures of high-profile families and could maintain absolute discretion. We talked for 2 hours that day. I shared my background, my philosophy on childcare, and my dream of creating something bigger than just another nanny service. She listened with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people for a living, asking questions that revealed she was as sharp in business as she was talented on screen. 3 weeks later, Miranda became more than just my first client. She became my silent partner and primary investor. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was invisible in the Morrison household, a Hollywood A-lister had seen my potential immediately. But success in the shadows is still shadow work, and I'd learned to be patient. My business, Pinnacle Care Services, was growing steadily but quietly. I had 12 families on my roster, a team of 6 carefully vetted caregivers, and a waiting list that included some of the most influential people in Boston, all while continuing to live in the Morrison attic and care for children who called me family, even if their father saw me as little more than hired help. Tonight's party would be different, though. I could feel it in the way Daniel's energy had shifted over the past week, how he'd been making more calls than usual, how he'd ordered the house cleaned to an even more impossible standard than normal. This wasn't just another social gathering. This was important to him, which meant it was an opportunity for me. As I prepared the children's lunch, Connor tugged on my sleeve. "Sophia, will you stay for the party tonight? I want to show all Daddy's friends how you taught me to speak French." Daniel's sharp laugh cut through the room. "Connor, Sophia isn't a guest. She's the help. The adults tonight are discussing very important business, things that someone like her wouldn't understand." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow, but I'd learned long ago not to react. Instead, I smiled at Connor and ruffled his hair. "I'll be here to tuck you in, sweetheart. That's what matters." But as Daniel returned to his newspaper, dismissing me as thoroughly as if I'd never spoken, I felt something shift inside me. The patient, invisible Sophia was tired of being overlooked. Tonight, I decided, would be the last night I'd accept being treated as less than I was. What none of them could see was the text message I'd received that morning from my business phone, a phone Daniel didn't even know existed. Miranda's latest referral, a pharmaceutical heiress whose nanny had just given notice, was willing to pay a premium rate that would push my monthly revenue past 6 figures. 6 figures. In a business I'd built while living in their attic and caring for their children. The irony was delicious, but the justice would be even sweeter. The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of preparation that had nothing to do with Daniel's party and everything to do with my own plans. While I helped Connor with his homework and supervised Emma's art project, my mind was calculating, planning, and anticipating the moment when my 2 worlds would finally collide. At 4 o'clock, Patricia's decorator arrived with a team of florists who transformed the main floor into something that belonged in Architectural Digest. Crystal chandeliers were polished to perfection. Fresh orchids appeared in every room, and the dining room table was set with china that cost more than most people's cars. I watched it all from the stairs while keeping the children entertained, mentally cataloging every detail. This was the world I'd been studying for 3 years, not just observing, but learning its language, understanding its unspoken rules, and recognizing the subtle power dynamics that determined who belonged and who served. Tonight, Daniel would get a masterclass in how wrong he'd been about which category I belonged in. "Sophia," Daniel's voice boomed from his study. "I need you to keep the children upstairs after 6:30. Some of my guests will be arriving early, and I don't want them disturbed." "Of course, Mr. Morrison," I called back, but my fingers were already typing a quick message on my business phone. "Confirmed for tonight. Thank you for understanding the timing." The response came immediately. "Wouldn't miss it. Time to make an entrance. M." By 6 o'clock, the first guests were arriving, and I could hear the murmur of expensive conversation drifting up from the main floor. I'd gotten the children fed, bathed, and into their pajamas early, but both Emma and Connor were too excited by the activity below to settle down easily. "Can we just peek?" Emma pleaded, pressing her face against her bedroom window that overlooked the circular driveway. "Look at all the fancy cars." I joined her at the window, and had to admit the view was impressive. Bentleys, Maseratis, and at least 3 different Teslas lined the driveway like an automotive show. These weren't just Daniel's business associates. This was old money, new money, and political power all gathered under one roof. "One quick peek," I agreed, taking both children by the hand and leading them to the top of the main staircase. From here, we could see into the living room, where about 30 people mingled with champagne glasses and practiced smiles. Daniel stood at the center of it all, commanding attention as he always did. He was discussing something with animated gestures to a group that included Senator Williams, tech entrepreneur Rebecca Martinez, and someone I recognized as the CEO of the largest investment firm in New England. "Daddy looks important," Connor whispered. And he was right. This was Daniel in his element, the master of his universe, surrounded by the kind of people who shaped policy and moved markets. "He is important, sweetheart," I said, smoothing his hair. "But so are lots of people, in lots of different ways." "Are you important, Sophia?" Emma asked, with the directness that only children possess. Before I could answer, Daniel's voice cut through the party chatter like a knife. "Sophia, what are you doing down there?" Every head in the room turned to look up at us, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Just putting the children to bed, Mr. Morrison. They wanted to say goodnight." "Well, get them upstairs. This isn't a circus for them to gawk at." His tone was sharp, authoritative, designed to remind everyone present exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of his world. But instead of the usual quick retreat, something made me pause. Maybe it was Emma's question about importance, or maybe it was the weight of the secret I'd been carrying for 18 months. Whatever it was, I found myself standing a little straighter. "Of course," I said, my voice carrying more clearly than usual. "Come along, Emma Connor. Time for your bedtime story." As we turned to go, I heard Senator Williams ask, "Daniel, how long has she been with your family?" 3 years, Daniel replied, and I could hear the dismissive shrug in his voice even without seeing it. "Good with the kids, but you know how it is with help these days. Hard to find people who understand their place." The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. By the time I'd finished reading Emma her favorite story about a princess who discovered she was actually a queen, I'd made a decision that would change everything. My business phone buzzed with another message. "Arriving in 20 minutes. Are you ready?" I looked at myself in the small mirror in my attic room. For 3 years I'd dressed down, blended in, made myself invisible. Tonight, that was going to change. I pulled out the one designer dress I owned, a simple but elegant black sheath that Miranda had insisted I buy during one of our business meetings. It was appropriate for any professional setting while being expensive enough to command respect. But the real transformation wasn't in the dress. It was in the way I carried myself as I applied makeup with hands that didn't shake, as I styled my hair with confidence instead of haste, and as I put on the pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, a reminder that dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. Downstairs, the party was reaching its peak. Laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the top-shelf liquor, and Daniel was clearly enjoying himself immensely. I could see him through the window of his study, gesturing expansively as he told what was probably an exaggerated story about one of his business victories. The doorbell rang, and I heard the housekeeper answer it, followed by a slight commotion in the entryway. Then I heard Miranda's voice, clear and confident, asking for me by name. My heart started beating faster, but it wasn't from nervousness. It was anticipation. This was it. The moment when invisible Sophia stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The moment when just a nanny became something Daniel Morrison had never seen coming. I took one last look around my attic room, at the simple furniture, the small window, the space that had been both sanctuary and prison for over 3 years. Tomorrow, I'd be waking up somewhere completely different. Tonight, Daniel Morrison was about to learn that he'd been harboring not just a nanny, but a businesswoman who'd been building an empire right under his nose. And the best part? He was about to find out in front of everyone who mattered in his world. The sound of Miranda Chen's voice in the Morrison entryway was like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of recognition and whispered conversation spread through the party in waves. I could hear Daniel's confusion from 2 floors up, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when something unexpected threatened his carefully orchestrated evening. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe you were on tonight's guest list," he was saying, trying to maintain his composure while clearly being thrown off his game. "Oh, I'm not here for your party," Miranda replied, and I could picture the slight smile she wore when she was about to deliver a perfectly timed line. "I'm here for Sophia. We have business to discuss." The silence that followed was deafening. In Daniel's world, business was conducted in boardrooms and private clubs, not by actresses showing up at private parties asking for the help. I could practically feel his brain struggling to process this information as I made my way downstairs. But I didn't rush. For 3 years, I'd moved through this house like a ghost, quick and unnoticed. Tonight, I descended those stairs like I owned them, taking my time, letting my heels click on the marble with intentional rhythm. When I reached the main floor, the party had effectively stopped. 30 of Boston's most influential people were staring at the tableau in the entryway. Miranda Chen, stunning in a sapphire blue dress that probably cost more than my annual salary, standing next to Daniel Morrison, who looked like someone had just told him the laws of physics had been suspended. "Miranda," I said warmly, extending my hand as if we were meeting at any normal business function. "Thank you for coming by. I hope the timing isn't too inconvenient." "Not at all," she replied, shaking my hand with the kind of warmth reserved for valued colleagues. "I was in the neighborhood and wanted to discuss the Richardson account. I think we're ready to move forward with the expansion." The terms meant nothing to most of the people listening, but they sounded important, professional, and expensive, which was exactly the point. Daniel's face had gone through several interesting color changes. "I'm sorry, but what exactly is going on here?" Miranda turned to him with the kind of polite attention one might give to someone who'd interrupted an important conversation. "Oh, you must be Sophia's current employer. Daniel Morrison, isn't it? I've heard so much about you." The way she said current employer made it sound temporary, transitional, like a stepping stone rather than a destination, which, I was beginning to realize, was exactly what it had been. "Sophia doesn't have business meetings," Daniel said, his voice tighter now. "She's our nanny. And an exceptional one, I'm sure," Miranda replied smoothly. "But she's also the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Care Services, one of the most exclusive childcare management firms on the East Coast. Didn't you know?" The silence that followed could have been carved with a knife. I watched Daniel's face as he processed this information, saw the exact moment when confusion shifted to something that looked almost like betrayal. But underneath that, I caught something else, a flicker of respect he'd never shown me before, quickly followed by embarrassment, as he realized everyone was watching his reaction. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She lives here. She's been our employee for 3 years. Sophia has a gift for compartmentalization," Miranda said, her actress training evident in how she commanded the room's attention without seeming to try. "It's one of the qualities that makes her so valuable. She can manage multiple high-pressure situations simultaneously while maintaining absolute discretion. It's rare to find someone who can build a multi-million-dollar business while still providing the kind of personal attention your family has received. Multi-million-dollar. The number hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw several guests exchange glances. These were people who understood what that meant, who knew that building a business to that level required intelligence, strategy, and skills they hadn't bothered to notice in the woman who'd been caring for Daniel's children. Senator Williams stepped forward, his politician's instincts recognizing an interesting story when he heard one. "Sophia, isn't it? I have to say this is fascinating. How exactly does one manage to build a business of that scope while working full-time?" This was my moment. The question I'd been preparing to answer for months. The explanation that would reshape how everyone in this room saw me, and how Daniel would see himself. "Time management and passion," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "When you truly believe in what you're building, you find ways to make it work. I've been developing Pinnacle Care during my off hours, but the experience I've gained here with the Morrison family has been invaluable. Understanding the unique needs of high-achieving families, managing complex schedules, coordinating with other professionals, all of those skills translate directly to what my clients need." I turned slightly, addressing the room, but keeping Daniel in my peripheral vision. "The families I work with now aren't just looking for babysitting. They need comprehensive household management, educational coordination, and someone who can seamlessly integrate into their professional and social lives. It's a specialized service for a specific market." "And you developed this business model while working here?" asked Rebecca Martinez, the tech entrepreneur. Her tone suggested genuine professional interest, rather than mere curiosity. "The Morrison family has been an incredible learning laboratory," I said, allowing myself a slight smile. "I've been able to observe and understand the challenges that families like yours face when trying to balance career demands with family responsibilities. Every day here has contributed to my ability to serve my current clients better." Daniel's face was now cycling through emotions like a kaleidoscope. I could see him recalculating every interaction we'd had, every assumption he'd made, every casual dismissal he'd delivered. The woman he'd treated as invisible hired help had been building something significant enough to attract a Hollywood A-lister as a business partner. "How many families are you currently serving?" asked someone from the back of the crowd. 12 primary clients with a team of 6 specialists, I replied. "We're selective about who we work with, focusing on families who value excellence and understand that premium service requires premium compensation." The phrase, premium compensation, hit the room like a small explosion. These people understood money, and the implication was clear. I wasn't just making nanny wages anymore. Miranda stepped closer, playing her part perfectly. Which brings me to why I'm here tonight. The Richardson account I mentioned. They need someone to oversee their household management while James transitions the company post-divorce. It's a significant contract, and we need to finalize the terms. She turned to Daniel with the kind of polite attention one shows to peripheral figures in important conversations. "I hope you'll forgive us for conducting business at your lovely party, but Sophia's schedule is quite demanding these days." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was completely speechless. "Actually," I said, seizing the moment I'd been waiting for, "this timing works out perfectly. I've been meaning to discuss my transition plans with you, Mr. Morrison." The word transition hit him like a physical blow. Transition? I'll be stepping back from full-time household positions to focus entirely on Pinnacle Care. Emma and Connor are at an age where they need more independence anyway, and I'm sure you'll find someone wonderful to take over their daily care. The practical implications were starting to dawn on him. No more Sophia to manage his children's schedules, coordinate their activities, handle the countless small crises that kept his household running smoothly. No more quiet efficiency that allowed him to focus entirely on his business without worrying about the home front. But more than that, he was realizing that for 3 years, he'd had someone exceptional working for him, and he'd never bothered to see it. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Daniel's world had just shifted on its axis, and I could see him struggling to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about the woman who'd been living in his house, caring for his children, and apparently building an empire he'd never bothered to notice. "When?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. 2 weeks, I replied, maintaining my professional tone. "That should give you time to find appropriate replacement care and allow me to transition Emma and Connor gradually. I would never leave them without proper support." Even in this moment of complete role reversal, I could see him noting that my first concern was still for his children. It was a detail that seemed to shake him more than anything else we'd discussed. Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, her entrepreneur's mind clearly working. "Sophia, I'd love to learn more about your business model. Are you taking on new clients?" "Selectively," I replied. "Our waiting list is quite substantial, but we're always interested in speaking with families who value excellence. The Richardson account alone is worth 7 figures annually," Miranda added casually, as if discussing the weather. "And that's just one contract." I watched the number hit the room like a wave. 7 figures. For childcare services. The people Daniel had invited to impress him were now looking at me with the kind of respect he'd been seeking for himself all evening. 7 figures? Senator Williams repeated, his political mind clearly calculating the implications. "For household management? For comprehensive family support services," I corrected. "When you're managing multiple properties, coordinating international travel, overseeing children's education and activities, and maintaining absolute discretion about sensitive family matters, it's not just childcare. It's executive-level household management." Daniel's face had gone pale. I could see him realizing that the simple nanny he'd been paying a modest salary had been providing services worth potentially millions of dollars annually, and he'd never recognized it. But the real blow was yet to come. "Actually," Miranda said, reaching into her purse, "I have something for you, Sophia. A little celebration gift." She pulled out a small wrapped box that I recognized immediately. Inside were the keys to my new car. Not just any car, but the pearl-white BMW X5 that I'd been dreaming about for years. The same model Patricia drove, except mine was newer, with features she'd never bothered to upgrade to. "You didn't," I said, though we'd planned this moment weeks ago. "Success should be celebrated," Miranda replied with a grin. "Besides, you can't be driving around in that Honda when you're meeting with clients like the Richardsons." The symbolism was perfect. For 3 years, I'd parked my beat-up Honda behind the kitchen like hired help. Tonight, I'd be driving away in a luxury SUV that announced I belonged in the same economic stratosphere as the people surrounding us. Daniel's eyes fixed on the key fob in my hands with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't just surprise or confusion anymore. It was something closer to awe, mixed with what might have been regret. The BMW dealership delivered it this afternoon, Miranda continued. It's parked outside whenever you're ready. You bought Sophia a car? Emma's voice cut through the adult conversation like a bell. I turned to see both children at the top of the stairs in their pajamas, having obviously snuck out of their rooms to see what all the commotion was about. Emma, Connor back to bed, Daniel said automatically, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Is that Miranda Chen? Connor asked, his 6-year-old priorities firmly in place. From the movies? Miranda laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the tension. It is, sweetie. And you must be the famous Connor and Emma I've heard so much about. Sophia talks about us? Emma asked, making her way down the stairs despite her father's directive. All the time, Miranda assured her. She's told me how smart you both are, how kind you are, and how much she cares about you. This was the moment that broke something in Daniel's expression. Watching his children interact with Miranda, seeing the easy warmth between them and the woman he'd dismissed as just the help, seemed to finally drive home exactly what he'd been too blind to see. Are you really buying Sophia a car? Connor asked with the directness only children can manage. I'm celebrating her success, Miranda replied. Sophia has built something amazing, and she deserves to be proud of it. What did she build? Emma asked. Miranda looked at me, and I nodded. This was the moment when everything would finally be out in the open. Your Sophia is the CEO of her own company, Miranda explained to the children. She helps other families just like yours, making sure children are safe and happy while their parents work. She's been building this business while taking care of you, and now it's so successful that she's going to focus on it full time. Does that mean you're leaving us? Connor asked, and I could hear the worry in his voice. I knelt down to his level, ignoring the crowd of adults watching this family drama unfold. It means I won't be living here anymore, sweetheart, but it also means that everything I learned taking care of you and Emma helped me become someone who can help lots of other children, too. Are you proud of her? Emma asked her father directly, with the kind of innocent question that can devastate an adult. Daniel looked down at his daughter, then at me, then at the room full of people who were all waiting for his answer. I could see him struggling with the magnitude of his misjudgment, with the realization that he'd had someone exceptional in his house for 3 years and had never bothered to really see her. Yes, he said quietly. I'm very proud of her. It was the first time he'd ever said anything like that to me, and despite everything, I felt a flutter of the validation I'd been seeking for so long, but it was too late for validation to change anything. The momentum of this moment was carrying me forward into a future where his opinion of me was irrelevant. The car really is beautiful, I said to Miranda, holding up the keys, though I feel like I should see it before I believe it's real. Oh, it's real, she assured me, and fully loaded. You're going to love the heated seats. Patricia Morrison's BMW didn't have heated seats. The detail was small, but in this crowd, it would be noticed. Should we go take a look? Miranda suggested. I'd love to see your reaction. I turned to Daniel, maintaining the professional courtesy I'd always shown him, even as our relationship fundamentally shifted. Mr. Morrison, if you'll excuse me for a few minutes, I know you have guests to attend to. He nodded mutely, still processing the evening's revelations. As Miranda and I headed toward the front door, followed by several curious guests, I heard Connor ask his father, Daddy, why didn't you know Sophia was important? The question hung in the air behind us as we stepped out into the cool evening air. Outside, parked prominently in the circular driveway between a Maserati and a Tesla, was my pearl-white BMW X5, its paint gleaming under the mansion's exterior lights. But more than the car itself, it was what it represented. Proof that the invisible woman who'd been dismissed as just a nanny had built something real, something valuable, something that commanded respect. As the small crowd gathered around the car, admiring its features and asking questions about my business, I caught Daniel watching from the window of his study. He was no longer the center of attention at his own party, and I could see him realizing that the most interesting person in his house tonight had been the one he'd overlooked for 3 years. The keys felt solid and real in my hand as I pressed the button to unlock the doors. The BMW's lights flashed in response, and I heard several appreciative murmurs from the crowd. This was it, the moment when everything changed. when I stopped being someone who worked for the Morrison family and became someone who had simply chosen to work with them for a while. But the real transformation wasn't in the car keys or the business success or even the respect I was finally receiving from Daniel's social circle. The real transformation was in how I saw myself. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't looking up at the Morrison mansion from the staff entrance. I was standing in front of it as an equal, holding the keys to my own future. The interior of the BMW was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Cream leather seats, a panoramic sunroof, and that distinctive new car smell that somehow managed to capture the essence of possibility itself. As I settled into the driver's seat, adjusting the position and running my hands over the steering wheel, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Miranda slipped into the passenger seat beside me, her smile radiant with the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like justice," I replied, surprising myself with how quickly the word came. Through the windshield, I could see Daniel's guests scattered across his front lawn, some admiring the car, others talking in small groups about what they'd just witnessed. But my attention was drawn to the window of his study, where Daniel stood alone, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know," Miranda said, following my gaze, "I don't think he's angry. He looks more stunned than anything else." She was right. Daniel didn't look furious or offended. He looked like someone who'd just discovered that the person sitting next to him on a long flight was actually a famous author, whose work he'd admired for years. Shocked recognition mixed with embarrassment at his own blindness. "He's probably calculating how much money he could have been making if he'd actually paid attention to what I was capable of," I said, though without the bitterness I might have felt even a week ago. "Maybe," Miranda agreed. "Or maybe he's realizing that he had something exceptional in his house and never bothered to appreciate it." Senator Williams appeared at my window, tapping gently on the glass. I lowered it, curious about what Boston's most influential politician might want to discuss. "Sophia, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I'm genuinely fascinated by what you've built. My chief of staff has been struggling to find reliable childcare that can handle the security requirements and scheduling complexity of our family's needs. Would you be open to a conversation?" Even through my euphoria, I recognized the significance of what he was offering. A senator's family came with unique challenges, security protocols, media attention, the kind of scrutiny that required absolute discretion and unshakable professionalism. It was exactly the type of high-profile client that could elevate Pinnacle Care to a new level entirely. "I'd be honored to discuss your family's needs, Senator," I replied, "though I should mention that our current waiting list is quite substantial." "I understand completely," he said. "Excellence is always in demand. Perhaps we could schedule something for next week?" As I exchanged contact information with a United States senator while sitting in my new BMW, I caught sight of Daniel approaching the car. The crowd around us had grown larger, with several people now asking Miranda detailed questions about the entertainment industry, while others peppered me with inquiries about my business model. But Daniel walked through the crowd with the determination of someone who'd made a decision, his face set in lines I'd never seen before. When he reached my window, he waited patiently for Senator Williams to finish speaking before stepping forward. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying none of its usual authority, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I considered the request, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to drive away right then, leaving him standing in his driveway with all the words he'd never bothered to say over the past 3 years. But another part, the part that had genuinely cared for Emma and Connor, that had maintained professionalism even when he'd shown me none, recognized that this conversation needed to happen. "Of course," I said, stepping out of the car. Miranda gave me an encouraging nod and moved to join the cluster of people admiring the BMW's features. Daniel led me a few steps away from the crowd, toward the side garden where we couldn't be overheard. For a moment, we stood in silence, listening to the distant sound of his party continuing without him. 3 years, he said finally, not looking at me but staring out at the city lights visible beyond his property. "You've been building this business for how long?" 18 months, seriously, I replied honestly. "But the foundation started the day I began working for your family. Every challenge I solved, every crisis I managed, every system I created to keep your household running smoothly, it all contributed to understanding what families like yours actually need." He turned to face me then, and I was surprised to see something that looked almost like vulnerability in his expression. "I never knew. I never even asked." "You never needed to know," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "I was hired to care for your children and manage your household, and I did that job well. What I did in my own time was my business. But you were extraordinary at it," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "The way you handled Emma's anxiety about starting school, how you coordinated Connor's tutoring schedule, the way you managed to keep the house running even when Patricia was gone for weeks at a time. I thought you were just good at following instructions." The admission hung between us, honest in its ignorance. "I was good at much more than that," I said quietly, "but you only saw what you expected to see." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd never seen from him before. It made him look younger, less certain. "The 7-figure contract Miranda mentioned. Is that real?" "It's real. The Richardson account is complex because of the divorce proceedings and the custody arrangements, but it's exactly the kind of comprehensive family management that Pinnacle Care specializes in." 7 figures, he repeated, almost to himself. "I was paying you $48,000 a year." The number sat between us like an accusation. Not an accusation of what he'd done wrong, but of what he'd failed to see. For $48,000, he'd been getting services worth potentially millions, provided by someone with the intelligence, discretion, and capability to build a business that attracted Hollywood stars as investors. "You were paying me what the market rate was for a live-in nanny," I said, "and I accepted that rate because I needed the experience and the stability while I built something bigger." "You used us," he said, but there was no anger in it, just a kind of amazed realization. "I learned from you," I corrected. "There's a difference. I provided excellent care for your children and excellent service to your family. The fact that I was also building my own future doesn't diminish what I gave you." He nodded slowly, processing this distinction. "Emma and Connor adore you, and I adore them. That was never fake, Daniel. That was never part of any strategy. Your children became part of my heart, and leaving them is the hardest part of all of this." The use of his first name seemed to surprise him. For 3 years, I'd been scrupulously formal, maintaining the boundaries he'd established, but those boundaries no longer applied. We were talking as equals now, perhaps for the first time. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I go build something bigger than either of us imagined possible when I first walked through your front door," I said. "And you find someone wonderful to care for Emma and Connor, someone who understands how special they are. Will you help me find someone?" The request surprised me. "You want my help hiring my replacement?" "I want to make sure Emma and Connor have the best possible care," he said, "and tonight has made it very clear that I don't know how to recognize exceptional people when they're right in front of me." It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me, and despite everything, I felt a softening toward this man who was finally seeing beyond his own assumptions. "I'll help you interview candidates," I agreed, "and I'll make sure whoever takes over understands Emma's routines and Connor's needs. Thank you," he said, and then, after a pause, "Sophia?" "Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never saw what you were capable of. I'm sorry I treated you like you were invisible. I'm sorry I said you were just a nanny in front of my children and my guests." The apology was more than I'd expected, more than I'd even hoped for, but it couldn't change the past 3 years, and it couldn't alter the trajectory I was now on. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means more than you might know. Will you stay in touch? I mean, will you let Emma and Connor know how you're doing?" I considered the question carefully. "I'll always care about them, Daniel. But my relationship with your family is changing. I think it's better if we make a clean transition." He nodded, understanding, even though I could see it disappointed him. "The business cards Miranda mentioned. Do you have any with you?" The question made me smile. "Are you thinking of hiring Pinnacle Care?" "Maybe," he said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Though I suspect you'd charge me significantly more than $48,000 a year." "Significantly," I agreed, but not unkindly. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the business cards I'd had printed months ago, but had never had occasion to use in this house. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored, with embossed lettering that spoke of quality and permanence. My name appeared in elegant script: Sophia Laurent, CEO, Pinnacle Care Services. Daniel took the card and studied it as if it were an artifact from another world. In many ways, it was. "Laurent?" he asked, noting that I'd used my middle name instead of my last name. "It sounds more sophisticated than Miller," I said with a shrug. "And it's family name, my grandmother's maiden name. She always told me that dignity was something you carried with you, not something other people could give you or take away. She sounds like a wise woman." She was. She would have loved seeing this moment. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, Two people who had shared the same space for 3 years finally seeing each other clearly. "I should get back to your guests," I said finally, "and I should get Emma and Connor properly settled for the night." "Of course," he said, but he didn't move immediately. "Sophia?" "Yes?" "For what it's worth, I think you're going to change everything. Not just for your clients, but for the whole industry. What you've done, building something this significant while working full-time, it's extraordinary. Coming from Daniel Morrison, a man who understood business and success, the compliment meant something. Not enough to change my plans, but enough to add a note of closure to our strange relationship." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot coming from you." As we walked back toward the house, I could see that my BMW had become the center of attention for his remaining guests. Miranda was holding court, telling some edited version of our business partnership, while Senator Williams examined the car's interior features, with the attention of someone genuinely interested in a potential purchase. But what caught my attention was the sight of Emma and Connor pressed against their bedroom window, watching the scene below with wide eyes. They waved when they saw me looking up, and I waved back, knowing that tomorrow I'd need to have a very different conversation with them about what all of this meant. "They're going to miss you terribly," Daniel said, following my gaze. "I'm going to miss them too," I admitted. "But sometimes you have to leave the people you love in order to become the person you're meant to be." It was a lesson I hoped Emma and Connor would remember when they were older, when they faced their own moments of choosing between safety and growth. Daniel opened his mouth as if to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he extended his hand for a handshake, the first time in 3 years he'd offered me that basic gesture of professional respect. "Congratulations, Sophia," he said as I shook his hand, "on everything you've built and everything you're going to build." "Thank you, Daniel," I replied, "for the opportunity to learn from your family and for finally seeing me clearly." As I walked back toward my new car and my new life, I felt the weight of 3 years lifting from my shoulders. Behind me was a world where I'd been invisible, undervalued, and dismissed as just the help. Ahead of me was a world where I was the CEO, the decision-maker, the one who commanded respect. But perhaps most importantly, I was finally the person my grandmother had always believed I could be, someone who carried her dignity with her, regardless of what others chose to see. The drive through Boston in my new BMW felt like floating through a dream I'd been having for 3 years, but had never dared believe could become reality. The leather seats, the smooth purr of the engine, the way other drivers actually gave me space on the road, everything reinforced that I was no longer the invisible woman in the beat-up Honda who parked behind the kitchen. Miranda had left the party shortly after our car reveal, but not before scheduling a breakfast meeting for the next morning to finalize the Richardson contract details. As I drove through the city that would soon be my territory in an entirely different way, I replayed the evening's events with a satisfaction that felt both surreal and deeply earned. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system, and I recognized the number immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen, Miranda's sister, and one of my first Pinnacle Care clients. "Sophia, I hope I'm not calling too late." Sarah's voice filled the car. "Miranda texted me about tonight's big reveal." "How did it go?" "Better than I could have imagined," I replied, navigating through downtown traffic with newfound confidence. "Your sister has a gift for dramatic timing." Sarah laughed. "That's putting it mildly. But seriously, I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. When I referred Miranda to you 6 months ago, I never imagined it would lead to this." The irony wasn't lost on me that my first client's referral had become my business partner and the catalyst for tonight's transformation. Sarah, a prominent cardiac surgeon, had hired Pinnacle Care when her nanny of 5 years suddenly moved across the country. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement had become a long-term partnership when Sarah realized the level of service I provided went far beyond typical childcare. "I have to ask," Sarah continued, "how did your employer react when he realized his nanny was actually running a multi-million-dollar business?" "I think stunned would be the most accurate description," I said, turning into the parking garage of the luxury apartment building I'd been quietly renting for the past month. But to his credit, he handled it better than I expected. "And how are you feeling?" "This is huge, Sophia. You've essentially revealed a secret identity you've been maintaining for almost 2 years." I parked in my assigned space, a space I'd been paying for weeks in anticipation of this moment, and sat in the quiet luxury of my new car, processing Sarah's question. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely free." After saying goodbye to Sarah, I took the elevator to the 15th floor, my heels clicking on marble floors that were mine to walk on as a resident, not a visitor. The apartment I'd been preparing was a far cry from the attic room at the Morrison mansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a kitchen with granite countertops I'd actually be able to use, and most importantly, a home office where I could run Pinnacle Care without hiding in corners and whispering on phone calls. But as I settled into the space that represented my new life, my thoughts kept returning to Emma and Connor. Tomorrow, I'd have to explain to two children who'd become like family that I was leaving, and somehow make them understand that it wasn't because I didn't love them. My business phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Senator Williams. Would 9 a.m. Tuesday work for an initial consultation? My office can send a car if needed." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of how quickly everything was changing. 3 days ago, I'd been invisible help. Now, a United States senator was offering to send a car to bring me to a business meeting. I replied confirming the appointment, then poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I'd been saving for this exact moment. Standing at my window, looking out at the city lights that no longer seemed like something I was excluded from, I allowed myself to fully absorb what had happened. Daniel Morrison's party had been intended to showcase his success, to reinforce his position in Boston's power structure. Instead, it had become the stage for my emergence from invisibility to equality, or perhaps even superiority, if Miranda's revenue projections proved accurate. But more than the financial success, more than the recognition or the respect I'd finally received, what mattered most was the knowledge that I'd done it ethically. I hadn't sabotaged the Morrison family or compromised the care I'd provided their children. I'd simply refused to limit myself to what others expected of me. My grandmother's pearl earrings caught the light as I moved, and I could almost hear her voice. "Dignity isn't given, Sophia. It's carried." Tonight, I'd finally learned to carry mine openly. The next morning came sooner than I wanted it to, bringing with it the most difficult conversation I'd had to have in years. Emma and Connor were waiting for me in the breakfast room, their faces serious in the way children's faces become when they sense that something important is happening. Daniel was conspicuously absent, having left early for what I suspected was a deliberately scheduled meeting. This conversation was mine to have. "Are you really leaving us?" Emma asked without preamble, her direct approach cutting straight to the heart of everything I'd been trying to figure out how to explain. "I'm not leaving you," I said carefully, sitting down at the table where I'd shared breakfast with them hundreds of times. "I'm changing how I work, which means I won't be living here anymore. But the time I spent taking care of you helped me learn how to take care of other children too." "But we want you to take care of us," Connor said, his 6-year-old logic impeccable. "And I love taking care of you," I replied honestly. "But sometimes, when you get really good at something, you have opportunities to do it in bigger ways, like how Connor is such a good reader now that he's ready for harder books." Emma considered this analogy with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "So you're like graduating from us?" The phrase was so perfectly childlike, and yet so accurate that I had to smile. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. I'm graduating. Will you still visit us?" Connor asked. This was the question I'd been dreading. "I'll always care about you both, but my new job means I'll be very busy helping other families. It's better if you focus on getting to know whoever your daddy finds to take care of you next." "Will they be as good as you?" Emma asked. "They'll be different from me," I said diplomatically. "But your daddy promised to find someone really special." We spent the next hour going through their routines, talking about their upcoming activities, and essentially saying goodbye in the way that children need, with attention to practical details that made the abstract concept of my leaving feel manageable. When Daniel returned home that afternoon, I was in my attic room packing the last of my belongings. The space that had been my entire world for 3 years could be packed into 4 boxes and 2 suitcases, a reminder of how little I'd allowed myself to accumulate while I was building something bigger. "How did they take it?" he asked from the doorway. "Better than I expected," I replied honestly. "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. I've scheduled interviews for this weekend," he said. "Would you be available to sit in on them?" "Of course. I want to make sure whoever you choose understands what Emma and Connor need." He nodded, then stood there for a moment as if there was something else he wanted to say. "Daniel," I said, turning from my packing to face him directly. "You're going to be fine. Your children are wonderful, and you'll find someone who can provide the care they need. Just remember to actually see the person you hire. Don't make the same mistake twice." "I won't," he said quietly. "Sophia, I know I said this last night, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, not just for how I treated you, but for what I missed. Having someone like you in my house and never recognizing what that meant. It was a failure on my part. It was a learning experience for both of us, I replied, and it led me to exactly where I needed to be. That evening, as I loaded my boxes into my BMW and prepared to drive away from the Morrison mansion for the last time as their employee, I found Emma and Connor waiting for me by the front door. "We made you something," Emma said, holding out a drawing that showed the three of us together, with hearts and flowers and the kind of artistic enthusiasm that only children can bring to their creations. "It's so we'll remember how much we love you," Connor added, "and so you'll remember how much we love you too." I knelt down and hugged them both, feeling the bittersweet mix of pride and loss that comes with any meaningful ending. "I will never, ever forget how much I love you both," I promised them. "And every time I help another family, I'll remember what I learned from being your Sophia." As I drove away from the Morrison mansion that night, the drawing carefully placed on my passenger seat, I knew I was leaving behind more than just a job. I was leaving behind the version of myself who had accepted being invisible, who had settled for being undervalued, who had believed that other people's opinions of her worth were more important than her own knowledge of what she was capable of achieving. The woman driving away in the pearl-white BMW was someone entirely different, someone who had learned to see herself clearly, regardless of whether others chose to see her at all. 3 years ago, I'd walked through Daniel Morrison's front door as someone looking for work. Tonight, I was driving away as someone who had created her own future, one careful step at a time, while nobody was watching. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my own apartment, check my calendar full of meetings with senators and celebrities and business leaders, and continue building something that had started as a desperate dream and had become a testament to what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your potential. But tonight, I simply drove through the city with the windows down, letting the cool air carry away the last traces of invisibility, and embracing the truth I'd always known, but had finally learned to own. I was never just a nanny. I was extraordinary. I had always been extraordinary. The difference was that now everyone could see it.